When I married Emily, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. She was smart, funny, and could light up a room just by walking into it. We'd been together for 8 years, and though we'd had our share of ups and downs, I never doubted her love for me. At least not until a few months ago. It started subtly. Emily became more protective of her phone, flipping it face down whenever I was around. She'd laugh at texts but brush it off when I asked. Work trips became more frequent, late nights more common, and the space between us grew, inch by inch. I blamed it on stress, on the pressures of her job. I didn't want to see what was right in front of me. Our best friends, Claire and Michael, were our lifeline. Double dates, weekend barbecues, you name it. Claire and Emily had been inseparable since college, and by extension, Michael and I got close too. I never imagined that the people I trusted most would be the ones to shatter my world. One Thursday afternoon, Claire called, her voice tight and controlled. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I figured she just needed to vent about Michael leaving dirty dishes in the sink again, but when I walked into the cafe, the look on her face said otherwise. Claire was fidgeting, twisting her wedding ring around her finger, eyes darting from the door to her latte to the floor. I'd never seen her like that. "Josh," she started, her voice cracking. "There's something you need to know. It's about Emily." My heart stuttered, but I forced a smile. "What's going on? Did she go overboard buying shoes again?" I joked, desperate to lighten the tension. Claire's eyes welled up, and my stomach dropped. She took a deep breath, words tumbling out in a rush. "I think she's having an affair. With Michael." Felt like the floor vanished beneath me. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "You're wrong," I said, the denial automatic, my voice hollow. "There's no way. Michael's your husband. For God's sake." Claire's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, scrolling and hesitating before sliding it across the table. A text thread glowed on the screen. Emily's name at the top, her words unmistakable. Things that made my chest tighten and my vision blur. Things I couldn't unsee. "I didn't want to believe it either," Claire whispered, her voice raw. "But I had to be sure. I followed them last night. They met at that hotel by the interstate." Her voice broke. "I watched them go in. They didn't come out for hours." The betrayal tasted bitter, rising like bile. But even through the shock, my mind was already racing. Emily lied to me. Michael betrayed Claire. But why tell me now? Why not confront them directly? Claire's eyes were dark, a spark beneath the grief. "I don't want to blow up our lives without knowing the whole truth," she said, voice steadier now. "And I can't do this alone. I should have walked away. Should have told her to confront Michael and left it at that." But something in her eyes, rage caged beneath heartbreak, struck a chord. I nodded slowly, feeling the anger simmer, unfamiliar and hot. "We find out everything," I heard myself say, my voice cold and distant. "Then we make them pay." And just like that, the trap was set. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. That night, I went home to find Emily in the kitchen, barefoot, hair pulled into a messy bun, humming softly to herself as she stirred something on the stove. The scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air. Her way of saying sorry after an argument. Except we hadn't argued. At least not yet. "Hey you," she greeted, glancing over her shoulder with that easy smile that used to make my chest warm. I forced my lips to curl, stepping forward to press a kiss to her temple. She smelled like lavender and guilt. "You're home early," I said, pulling back to study her face. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "Yeah, I finished up at work early," she replied, too quickly. "Thought I'd make your favorite, rosemary chicken and potatoes." "Sounds great," I murmured, fingers tightening on the counter edge. The lies came so effortlessly, it made my skin crawl. Dinner was a quiet affair, filled with the clinking of forks and the muffled hum of the TV in the living room. Emily filled the silence with stories about her day, her laugh light and sweet, the same laugh that had echoed in Claire's texts from earlier. I nodded in all the right places, jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. When she reached for my hand across the table, I nearly flinched. Her fingers were warm and soft, thumb brushing slow circles over my knuckles. "You okay?" she asked, head tilted, eyes wide and earnest. "Yeah," I lied, voice steady. "Just tired." She smiled, relief softening her features. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have leaned in, might have kissed her. Instead, I excused myself, claiming a headache, and locked myself in my office until I heard her head upstairs for bed. The plan. The next morning, Claire and I met at a small diner on the edge of town. The kind with sticky vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burned regret. Claire was already there when I arrived, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, eyes rimmed red but sharp with purpose. She pushed a manila envelope across the table as soon as I sat down. I hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were photos. Grainy, zoomed-in shots of Emily and Michael, heads bent close in the dim light of a restaurant, hands brushing across the table. One, taken at a hotel parking lot, caught them mid-kiss, Michael's hand fisted in her hair. My stomach turned. "Where did you get these?" I asked, voice rough. "Private investigator," Claire admitted, gaze fixed on the table. "I hired him 2 weeks ago when Michael's work trips suddenly doubled. Guess I was right to trust my gut." I sifted through the photos again, bile rising in my throat. "So what now?" Claire took a shaky breath, fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against her mug. "They're not just cheating, Josh. They're planning something." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She pulled out her phone, scrolling before handing it over. A text thread, this time between Michael and Emily. Him. "This weekend? Can you get away?" Her. "Josh has that conference. I'll tell him I'm staying with you for a girls' weekend." Him. "Perfect. We can talk about how to handle everything." "Everything?" Claire repeated, bitterness curling the word. "I don't know what that means, but I intend to find out." The gears were turning, rage sharpening into something cold and methodical. "We can't just confront them," I said slowly. "They'll deny everything, make us look crazy." "I know," Claire agreed, eyes dark and hard. "That's why we're going to gather proof first. Enough to ruin them." Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. For the first time since finding out, I felt a flicker of something almost like relief. I wasn't in this alone. The game begins. Over the next week, Claire and I played our parts to perfection. I kissed Emily goodbye in the mornings, smiled at her texts throughout the day, pretended not to notice when she slipped out of bed at midnight to take calls from Michael. Claire did the same. Cooked Michael's favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, waited for him to fall asleep before checking his phone for anything useful. We met in secret, swapping information at coffee shops and parking lots, crafting a plan so intricate it could have been a heist. We tracked their meetings, documented every text, every phone call, every lie. One night, as I was scrolling through photos of Emily wrapped around Michael, I caught sight of a new message. A number I didn't recognize. Unknown. "Still on for Friday? Miss you." Her. "Of course. Can't wait." Red heart. My blood turned to ice. Another man? How many secrets did she have buried beneath that sweet smile and lavender perfume? I texted Claire, fingers flying. "Me. We have a problem." Her response was instant. "Claire, meet me tomorrow. We'll figure it out." I stared at the messages until the words blurred. Emily shifted beside me in bed, murmuring in her sleep, arm draped across my chest like a weight. I stayed rigid, eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster until the sun rose. A new player. By morning, Claire had already pulled up phone records, cross-referencing numbers with a kind of cold efficiency that was almost frightening. "It's Greg," she said, voice tight. "Emily's boss." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "Of course it is." "That's not all," Claire continued, sliding her laptop toward me. An email thread was open, littered with attachments, financial statements, wire transfers, hotel bookings. He's been paying for her trips. Thousands of dollars. A new kind of betrayal settled over me, heavy and suffocating. Not just Michael, but her boss too. The woman I'd spent 8 years with was a stranger wearing my wife's face. Claire's eyes met mine, dark and determined. They want to play games? Fine. Let's give them one they'll never forget. I nodded slowly, vision narrowing to a single point. I wanted them to hurt. Wanted to rip their perfect little world apart piece by piece. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making them watch as everything they'd built crumbled to ashes. And God help them when it did. Trust is a funny thing. You think it's solid, steel and concrete, but one crack and it shatters into a million pieces. And once it's gone, you can't glue it back together. Not really. That's what I was thinking as I stared at Emily across the dinner table. Her laugh a little too bright, her smile a little too wide. She reached for my hand, fingers warm and soft, thumb brushing over my knuckles. "You've been so quiet lately," she said, eyes searching mine. "Everything okay?" My jaw ached from forcing a smile. "Just work?" I lied, watching her shoulders relax, the worry melt from her eyes. It made me sick. All those times she'd accused me of being distant, of burying myself in work. Turns out the whole time she was the one slipping away. If she noticed I barely touched my dinner, she didn't say anything. She chattered about her day, about the girls' weekend she was planning with Claire. I barely heard a word, too busy cataloging every detail. The way she avoided my eyes when she said she loved me, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion, and locked myself in my office. Lights off, curtains drawn. My laptop screen glowed in the dark, emails and text logs spilling secrets faster than I could process them. Every new message felt like a punch to the gut. Emily wasn't just cheating. She was planning something with Michael and Greg, something bigger than late-night hotel rendezvous and stolen kisses. The next morning, I met Claire in the back of a dusty library, the kind of place no one would think to look for us. She was already there, flipping through a stack of printouts, eyes rimmed red but razor-sharp. "You look like hell," I muttered, sliding into the seat across from her. She snorted, tossing a folder my way. "Right back at you." I flipped it open, skimming the bank statements and emails inside. Wire transfers. Thousands of dollars, all from Greg to Emily's personal account. And then a series of emails between Michael and Emily, subject lines like, "Final steps" and "The plan." My pulse kicked up a notch. Claire leaned in, voice low and clipped. "They're trying to bleed us dry. Greg's been funneling money into Emily's account for months. And look at this." She stabbed a manicured finger at a printout of Michael's financials. "He took out a second mortgage without telling me. They're using it to buy out shares of my family's company." The implications settled like ice in my veins. "They want control," I said slowly. "Of your money, of our assets, everything." Claire's lips twisted. "They're setting us up to take the fall. Once they've drained us dry, they'll file for divorce, walk away with half of everything, and leave us bankrupt." I slumped back, running a hand over my face. It wasn't just an affair. It was a hostile takeover. "What do we do?" I asked, voice tight. Claire's eyes flashed, dark and dangerous. "We hit back. Hard." The first step was locking down our assets. Claire moved fast, transferring funds to a separate account under her maiden name, blocking Michael's access to anything significant. I did the same, draining our joint accounts, freezing credit cards, securing everything they hadn't already touched. We spent hours combing through every email, every text, every slip-up. The deeper we dug, the more twisted the story became. Greg wasn't just Emily's boss. He was in on the whole thing, using company funds to bankroll their little coup. And Michael, the friend I trusted with everything, was right there by his side. Claire and I moved like shadows, careful, precise, leaving no trail. We planted listening devices in Emily's car, in her favorite purse, in the den where she liked to make her late-night calls. We were quiet. We were patient. We waited. Came a week later, just past midnight. I was slouched in my office chair, running on cold coffee and spite, when Claire's number flashed on my screen. "It's happening," she said, breathless, no greeting. "They're at that hotel again." I was out the door in minutes, tires screeching as I pulled onto the highway. Claire was already there when I arrived, leaning against her car, eyes fixed on the hotel entrance. She barely looked at me as she handed over a small recording device, thumb brushing the play button. The first voice was Emily's, soft and breathy. My gut twisted at the sound of it. "I can't keep lying to him," she whispered. "He's starting to get suspicious." "Relax," Michael's voice replied, smooth and unbothered. "By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. Greg's almost got the papers ready. Once they're signed, it's over." "It just feels wrong," Emily said, voice wavering. "I didn't sign up for this." Michael laughed, low and cruel. "You signed up the second you crawled into my bed, babe. Now quit whining and follow the plan." The recording clicked off, silence hanging thick and suffocating. I stared at the device, jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Beside me, Claire's face was stony, eyes fixed on the hotel entrance. "Still think we should let them off easy?" she asked, voice cold. I turned, met her eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Not a chance in hell. We spent the next few days setting up the pieces, transferring money into a fake account, forging emails from Greg's address, creating a paper trail that led straight to Michael and Emily. The goal wasn't just to expose them, it was to bury them. By Friday, the trap was set. All we had to do was wait. Claire played her part flawlessly, all teary eyes and quivering lips when she confronted Michael at home, demanding to know why thousands of dollars were missing from their account. Michael stammered through half a dozen excuses, none of them convincing. When she showed him the emails from Greg, his face went white. That night he called Emily, voice shaking. "We recorded every word." "We're screwed," he snapped. "Someone knows. We have to get out now." "Calm down," Emily whispered. But even through the crackling speakers, I could hear the tremor in her voice. "It's probably nothing. Just meet me tomorrow. We'll figure it out." Michael cursed, breath ragged. "If this falls apart, we're done. You hear me?" "Oh, it's falling apart," I muttered, cutting the audio, heart thundering. "And I'm gonna watch you burn." I'd never been one for theatrics. I was the kind of guy who preferred simple solutions to complex problems. But as I watched Emily and Michael walk into that hotel, their heads bent close, hands brushing, I realized that sometimes a little spectacle was exactly what was needed. Claire stood beside me, fingers tapping against her thigh, eyes narrowed on the entrance. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure about anything," I muttered, eyes fixed on the revolving door that had swallowed up my wife and my so-called best friend. She didn't argue, just nodded, eyes dark and hollow, and slipped into her car without another word. I waited a few minutes, watching the parking lot, every muscle coiled tight and aching. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed. The private investigator picked up on the first ring. "They're inside," I said flatly. "Get everything." "Already on it," he replied, and I could hear the faint click of a camera shutter in the background. "You'll have the footage by morning." I ended the call without replying, fingers curling so tight around the wheel that the leather groaned. The rage was a dull throb beneath my skin, begging to be let loose, but I forced it down, forced my hands steady as I started the car and pulled away. There'd be time for that soon enough. I drove around for an hour, circling back to the house only when I was sure I wouldn't put my fist through a wall the second I stepped inside. The lights were off when I got home, the living room dark and silent, but I knew better. Emily's car was in the driveway, her heels abandoned by the door, purse tossed carelessly on the entryway table. She was home. I found her in the kitchen, sipping a glass of red wine with her back to the door, swaying slightly to a song playing low from her phone. When she turned and spotted me, her face lit up, eyes soft and warm and so damn believable it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. "You're home late," she murmured, setting down her glass with a soft smile. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just work." Her eyes softened, brows knitting in concern as she crossed the kitchen, arms sliding around my neck. "You're always so tense," she sighed, fingers weaving into my hair. Her perfume was different, something floral and sweet. It made my stomach twist. I miss you. The words burned, and it took everything in me not to push her away. I forced my hands to settle at her waist, forced myself to tilt my head and kiss her. Slow and deep, fingers tightening until she made a soft sound of surprise. Bedroom? She whispered against my mouth, eyes half-lidded, breath warm. Yeah, I rasped, swallowing down the bile rising in my throat. It was a mistake. I knew it the second we reached the bed. The sheets still rumpled from that morning, her hands warm and familiar and wrong. But I couldn't stop, couldn't make myself pull away. Maybe I just needed to remember what she used to feel like, what we used to be before the lies. Or maybe I just wanted to ruin something that had already been shattered. Afterward, as she slept beside me, her breath soft and even, her head tucked against my shoulder, I stared at the ceiling, eyes gritty and raw. I couldn't tell if I felt better or worse. I slipped out of bed before dawn, careful not to wake her, and locked myself in the bathroom. The face in the mirror was a stranger. Eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, mouth pulled tight. I splashed cold water over my face, hands shaking, and stayed there until the sun bled pale light through the curtains. When I came out, Emily was already in the kitchen, dressed in that blue dress I liked, hair falling in loose waves, coffee brewing. She beamed when she spotted me, warm and bright and so damn genuine I almost faltered. "Morning," she greeted, stretching up to press a kiss to my cheek. "I was thinking we could do something tonight. Just us." I forced a smile, heart thudding painfully in my chest. "Sounds good," I replied, voice even. And the worst part was I meant it. Even knowing what I knew, some part of me, some weak, miserable part, still wanted to believe her. I spent most of the day holed up in my office, pretending to work while my phone buzzed every few minutes with texts from Claire. Updates, photos, recordings. The kind of evidence that could burn a life to the ground if you knew how to use it. I skimmed through them, jaw tight, vision blurring with every new text. Emily and Michael, pressed close in the hotel hallway, her laugh muffled against his chest. Bank statements, withdrawals, signatures that weren't mine on documents I'd never seen. The kind of betrayal that hollowed you out, left you raw and bleeding. The PI had sent over the video footage by noon. I couldn't bring myself to watch it. When Emily called around lunchtime, voice warm and bright, asking if I wanted her to pick up takeout, I almost choked on the fury lodged in my throat. "Yeah," I managed, gripping the edge of my desk until my knuckles ached. "That'd be great." "Perfect," she chirped, oblivious. "See you tonight, babe." The line clicked dead, and I slumped back in my chair, pulse hammering in my ears, hands shaking. I stared at the phone, at the photos still open on the screen, and for the first time, I couldn't breathe past the rage. They thought they'd get away with it, thought I'd just roll over, sign the papers, let them walk away with everything. But they were wrong. I dialed Claire without thinking, fingers trembling. She picked up on the second ring, voice clipped and tense. "We're doing this," I rasped, throat tight. "Tonight." She hesitated, but her voice was firm when she replied. "I'll be there." I hung up, exhaled slow, and braced my hands against the desk, knuckles white. They wanted a war? Fine. I'd show them what war looked like. When Emily came home that evening, her smile was so bright it almost blinded me. She waltzed into the kitchen, bags of takeout swinging from her hands, humming something soft and sweet that turned my stomach. The kind of song she used to hum on lazy Sunday mornings when she'd drape herself over my chest, eyes heavy with sleep and love. Except none of it was real. Not the smiles, not the warmth, not the promises she'd whispered late at night when the world was dark and quiet. "Hey, babe," she called, nudging the door shut with her hip. "I got your favorite, orange chicken and fried rice." My hands trembled as I took the bags from her, forcing a smile so brittle it felt like glass. "Sounds great," I said, my voice flat, distant. If she noticed, she didn't say anything, just chattered about her day, about clients and meetings and a coworker's new puppy. Every word a lie, every laugh a dagger between my ribs. I clenched my teeth, fingers tight around the takeout containers, counting each breath until the edges of my vision stopped blurring red. I'd planned to wait until after dinner, until I'd gathered every piece of evidence, until Claire and I had everything ready. But as Emily leaned across the counter, lips curved and eyes bright, asking me about my day, something in me snapped. "Where were you last night?" I asked abruptly, voice cold. She blinked, smile faltering. "What? You heard me?" I bit out, setting the takeout bags down with a thud. "Where were you?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but I caught it, the crack in the mask. "I was with Claire," she replied smoothly, shoulders relaxing. "Girls' night. We drank way too much wine, honestly." The audacity almost left me breathless. I barked out a laugh, sharp and bitter, watching her flinch. "Really?" I sneered. "That's your story?" She straightened, eyes narrowing. "What's your problem?" "My problem," I ground out, slamming my hands down on the counter, "is that you're a lying, cheating." The doorbell rang, slicing through my words like a knife. Emily startled, eyes darting to the hallway. "Who? Why don't you see for yourself?" I snapped, stepping back, chest heaving. She shot me a glare but smoothed her dress, eyes dark with irritation as she strode to the door. I followed a few steps behind, every muscle coiled tight. She pulled the door open with a huff, only to freeze, face draining of color. Claire stood on the doorstep, arms crossed, eyes cold and hard. Behind her, 2 police officers flanked the porch, hands resting on their belts. "Claire," Emily breathed, eyes wide and wild. What's going on?" Claire's smile was all teeth. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing." Emily's gaze flickered to me, desperation bleeding into her eyes. "Josh," she choked out, voice trembling. "What is this?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, heart thundering. "You're about to find out," I drawled. The officers exchanged a glance before the taller one stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Emily Harper?" he asked, voice firm. Emily's hands shook, eyes darting between us. Yes. "We have a warrant to search the premises," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "We've received substantial evidence of financial fraud and embezzlement, all traced back to your account." Her face went sheet white, lips parting soundlessly. No, that's not possible," she stammered, hands fluttering. "There must be some mistake." "I don't think so," Claire cut in, voice ice cold. "You and Michael have been funneling money out of my family's company for months. Did you really think no one would notice?" Emily swayed, hand braced against the doorframe, eyes wide and pleading. "Josh," she gasped, voice high and cracked. "Please, you have to believe me. This isn't." "Save it," I snapped, rage choking every word. "I've seen the bank statements, the texts, the hotel bookings. I know everything." Her mouth worked soundlessly, eyes glistening with tears. For a second, a sick part of me almost pitied her. Almost. "Look," she tried again, voice cracking. I can explain." The officer stepped forward, handcuffs glinting under the porch light. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to step outside." Her eyes went wide, breath hitching. "No, wait, Josh, please. Save your breath." I bit out, jaw clenched so tight it ached. "I'm done listening to your lies." She struggled as they pulled her forward, wrists snapping into cuffs with a metallic click that was almost satisfying. Her eyes were wild, mascara streaking down her cheeks, heels scraping the porch as she twisted to meet my eyes. "Josh," she sobbed, voice ragged. "Please, I love you." "I didn't mean." I laughed, low and bitter. "Yeah," I sneered, leaning in close enough to see the terror swimming in her eyes. "Save it for Michael." The officers led her down the porch, her sobs splitting the night, and I watched, arms crossed, face blank. My heart pounded, each beat a dull ache that echoed through my chest, but I couldn't stop smiling. Claire let out a shaky breath beside me, eyes dark and gleaming. That was, she trailed off, voice unsteady. Brutal, I supplied, lips twisting. Her mouth twitched. Satisfying. We stood there in silence, watching the red and blue lights fade down the street, Emily's wails echoing long after the car disappeared around the corner. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. It's not over yet, she murmured, eyes sharp and calculating. Michael's next. I breathed out slow, the rage settling into something darker and colder. I know, I rasped, eyes fixed on the horizon. And I can't wait. Emily's screams had barely faded before Claire was on the phone, voice low and clipped as she gave the address and license plate number to the private investigator. Her fingers trembled as she ended the call, but her eyes were steady, glinting with a dangerous light I hadn't seen before. She snapped her phone shut, exhaling slow, shoulders sagging for half a second before she straightened, jaw tight. We need to move, she muttered, voice hard. If Michael catches wind of this before we have everything. He won't. I cut in, forcing my voice steady, fists flexing at my sides. He's at that little condo across town. I put a tracker on his car last week. Claire blinked, surprise flickering across her face before she huffed out a laugh, low and humorless. Guess I'm not the only one who's been busy. You have no idea, I muttered, already heading for my car. Claire's heels clicked against the porch as she followed, eyes darting down the dark street, nerves bleeding into the tight line of her mouth. She slid into the passenger seat, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame, fingers tapping against her thigh in an erratic rhythm. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I want to be there, she bit out. When he sees it all fall apart. I want to see his face. You will, I promised, starting the engine, tires squealing as we peeled out of the driveway. The city bled past in a blur of streetlights and darkened storefronts, rain streaking the windshield in thin, glittering lines. Claire was silent, fingers twisting in the hem of her coat, eyes fixed on the road, but I caught the way her breath shuddered every few minutes, the way her nails dug into her palms until her knuckles gleamed bone-white. I didn't blame her. The rage was a living thing beneath my skin, raw and hungry and clawing to get out. Every mile felt like a countdown, every stoplight an obstacle between me and the moment I could finally rip Michael's perfect little world to pieces. By the time we pulled into the parking lot, my hands were shaking, adrenaline thrumming hot and electric. Michael's car was parked near the entrance, rain streaking the windshield, the apartment windows dark and still. Claire exhaled slow, breath fogging the glass. How do you want to do this? She muttered, voice thin and sharp. I knock. I bit out, already reaching for the door handle. You watch. I didn't wait for a reply, slamming the door behind me and striding up the walkway, rain spitting cold against my face. Claire's heels clicked a few steps behind, her breath harsh and uneven, but I didn't look back. I knocked hard, each rap echoing down the empty corridor, chest heaving, fists flexing at my sides. For a moment, the only sound was the rain drumming against the pavement, my pulse thundering in my ears. Then footsteps thudded down the hallway, and the door cracked open. Michael's eyes were bleary and half-lidded, shirt rumpled, hair sticking up at odd angles. It took him a second to register who was standing in his doorway, another for his eyes to widen, mouth parting. Josh, he stammered, hand braced against the door. What the hell? My fist connected with his jaw before he could finish, a sick, satisfying crunch reverberating up my arm. Michael staggered back, yelping as he hit the wall, hand flying to his face, eyes wide and panicked. What the hell is wrong with you? He sputtered, voice muffled around his palm. You really want to ask me that? I sneered, stepping forward until he was pressed against the wall, chest heaving, eyes darting to the open door behind me. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Claire's silhouette in the hallway, her face shadowed but eyes glinting. His face went pale, mouth twisting. Look, he choked out, hands raised, palms out. I can explain. Explain. I bit out, lip curling. You mean lie? Like you've been doing for the past year. His mouth opened and closed, face blanching. Josh, come on, man. Save it, I snapped, shoving him back hard enough that his head cracked against the drywall, the picture frame beside him shuddering. We know everything. The money, the company shares, the fake contracts. And Emily. He flinched, eyes darting to Claire, mouth twisting. I didn't want. Claire snorted, sharp and bitter. Spare me? She spat, stepping forward until she was a breath away, eyes glinting with something dark and lethal. You had the PI follow me for weeks. The fake arguments, the bank transfers. It's all on tape. Michael's face crumpled, shoulders sagging, eyes glistening with desperation. Claire, he rasped, voice cracking. Baby, please, you don't understand. She slapped him, hard enough to snap his head sideways, palm cracking against his cheek. He yelped, stumbling, hand flying to his face, eyes wide and disbelieving. Don't, Claire bit out, voice shaking. Don't you dare call me that. His eyes darted between us, breath coming fast and shallow, hand pressed to his cheek. Look, he panted, stumbling back a step, eyes wild. We can work something out. You don't have to. I laughed, a sharp, bitter bark that echoed off the walls. Oh, I think we do, I sneered. See, the cops should be here any minute. And once they get a look at those bank statements. I let the threat hang, watching his face go slack, eyes wide and panicked. Josh, he choked, voice thin and reedy. Please, come on, we're friends. I snapped, stepping forward until my face was inches from his, voice low and venomous. We were friends. Now, I smiled, slow and cold. You're nothing. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights glinting off the windows, rain streaking neon lines across the glass. Michael's breath hitched, eyes darting wildly between us, shoulders trembling. He turned, stumbling for the door, but Claire moved first, shoving him back with a snarl. You're not going anywhere, she hissed, voice low and savage. You ruined my life, my family's company. You really thought I'd let you walk away? His mouth worked soundlessly, eyes wide and glistening, and for a second, a sick part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I smirked, crossing my arms as the red and blue lights flooded the hallway, footsteps thundering up the stairs. You wanted a way out? I sneered. Here's your chance. Tell the cops everything, and maybe they won't throw you in a cell to rot. His face crumpled, shoulders sagging, and he let out a strangled sound, half sob, half gasp. Please, he choked, voice cracking. Please. Claire's eyes glinted, mouth twisting in a cruel smile. Rot in hell, she spat. I grinned, sharp and bitter, watching the officers haul him down the hallway, wrists bound, eyes wide and panicked. His screams echoed long after the door slammed shut, sirens fading into the night. Claire let out a shaky breath, swiping a hand across her mouth, eyes glistening with something dark and raw. I stared at the door, heart pounding, rage simmering beneath my skin, and for the first time in months, I breathed easy. It was over, or so I thought. The thing about revenge is that it doesn't fill the hole. Not really. The first few days after Michael and Emily were hauled away, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Emily's wide with panic, Michael's twisted in desperation. I should have felt satisfied, should have been basking in the way their lives crumbled to ash right in front of me. But all I felt was raw, hollow exhaustion. The house was too quiet. Emily's perfume still clung to the sheets, her clothes hanging neatly in the closet, untouched. I hadn't been able to throw them out yet. Couldn't bring myself to scrub the memories from the walls, even though I knew every inch was stained with her lies. The phone rang constantly. Lawyers, reporters, friends who wanted the scoop, who pretended to be shocked and appalled, but whose eyes gleamed with morbid curiosity. I stopped answering after the first dozen. Let them pile up in a heap of missed calls and unanswered texts. Let them think what they wanted. Claire came by every day, eyes rimmed red, hands shaking whenever she set down a coffee cup or a stack of papers. She'd put on makeup, crisp blouses and pencil skirts, hair pulled back tight enough to strain, but the strain still bled through. We spoke in clipped, empty sentences, avoided each other's eyes, tried not to acknowledge the carnage we'd left behind. It worked for a while, until it didn't. It was 3 days after Michael's arrest when Claire showed up on my doorstep, face pale, eyes glassy. She didn't speak, just pushed past me into the hallway, heels clicking against the hardwood, breathing shallow and ragged. "Claire." I frowned, shutting the door behind her, fingers flexing. "What's wrong?" She turned, eyes wild, jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack. She shoved a folder into my chest, hard enough to knock me back a step, fingers trembling. "Did you know?" She bit out, voice low and raw. "Did you know about this?" I frowned, flipping the folder open. Legal papers spilled out, contracts, account statements, documents stamped with Greg's name. And Emily's. The breath rushed out of my lungs in a hard whoosh, knees buckling. What is this?" I rasped, throat tight. Claire laughed, sharp and bitter, eyes glistening. "It's the rest of the plan," she sneered, voice cracking. "The money they siphoned wasn't just for them. They were setting up offshore accounts, Josh. Accounts in our names." The words hit like a punch to the gut. "That's not possible," I choked, rifling through the pages, hands shaking. "It is," Claire spat, voice rising. "They were going to frame us, drain the accounts, file for divorce, and leave us to take the fall for fraud and embezzlement. All of it. We're the ones who look guilty." My mouth worked soundlessly, eyes darting over signatures. My name, scrawled across transfer slips and loan documents, inked in neat, damning lines. I staggered back, papers fluttering to the floor, heart thundering. "No," I gasped, head shaking, chest tight. That can't." Claire scoffed, eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "Oh, it is," she bit out. "You really think Emily loved you? That Michael ever gave a damn about me? They played us, Josh. This was the plan all along." My knees gave out, back slamming against the wall, breath hitching in ragged gasps. The room spun, edges blurring, blood rushing in my ears. I'd been so sure, so damn sure that I was in control, that I'd beaten them at their own game. But it was a lie. It was all a lie. "They'll go to prison," I choked, grasping for anything solid, anything to anchor me. "The cops have everything they'll see." Claire barked out a laugh, harsh and empty. "Do you really think Greg's going down without a fight?" she sneered. "He's been buying off cops for years. Those accounts are in our names, Josh. They'll come for us next." The words punched the air from my lungs, left me swaying, vision spotting. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. We spent the next 2 days tearing through every paper, every bank statement, every thread we could unravel. Claire hardly slept, eyes red-rimmed and wild, snapping orders into the phone, hands flying over her laptop, tapping into offshore databases, private accounts, anything she could find. I could barely breathe, barely think past the raw panic clawing up my throat, the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing in from all sides. We found the documents buried in a folder on Emily's laptop. Encrypted files, passcodes hidden in texts and emails, phrases she'd muttered in her sleep. Proof that Greg had been siphoning money for years through fake accounts, shell companies, investments that didn't exist. Millions of dollars, all tied back to Claire and me, our names stamped on every deposit slip. They weren't just trying to ruin us. They were trying to erase us. By the time the sun bled through the curtains, we were pale and shaking, hands trembling over keyboards, eyes dark and hollow. Claire's breath hitched when she spoke, voice thin and ragged. "They'll come for us next," she choked, eyes glistening. "If we don't stop them, we will," I rasped, voice low and raw. "But we have to be smart." Her eyes narrowed, lip curling. "How?" she spat. "They have the money, the cops, the evidence. What the hell are we supposed to do?" I dragged a hand over my face, chest heaving, mind spinning. We couldn't go to the police, not without exposing ourselves. Couldn't confront Greg without a paper trail to bury him. We needed proof. Real proof. And there was only one way to get it. I exhaled slow, heart hammering. We hit them where it hurts, I muttered, voice cold. We get into Greg's accounts, his emails, find the paper trail. We flip this on them, make it look like they set us up. It's the only way. Claire stared, mouth parting. You're insane, she breathed. That'll never work. It has to, I snapped, jaw clenched. Or we're both screwed. Her face crumpled, eyes glistening, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then her mouth twisted, eyes darkening with something sharp and lethal, and she nodded, breath shuddering. Then let's burn them, she whispered, voice shaking. Let's burn them all. I exhaled slow, jaw tight, vision narrowing to a single point. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. And God helped them when we were through. In the end, it was easier than I thought. Greg was arrogant, that was his mistake. He didn't bother covering his tracks, too convinced that the cops he'd bought would bury any evidence we found. But everyone has a weakness. His was greed. It took Claire less than a day to break into his emails, to trace the offshore accounts, to find the files tying him to every dirty deal, every bribe, every transfer. We didn't bother with the police. We went straight to the feds. The fallout was fast and brutal. Greg was arrested first, dragged out of his office in cuffs, face pale and furious. He tried to take Emily down with him, tried to pin everything on her. It might have worked if we hadn't handed the feds a file with every email, every document, every damning signature. His lawyers didn't stand a chance. Emily's face was plastered across every news channel, eyes wide and glistening, mouth trembling as cameras flashed. Reporters shouting questions she couldn't answer. Michael's arrest came a day later, caught trying to flee the state with a suitcase of cash and a fake passport. Their pleas rang hollow in court. Cracked voices begging for mercy, for understanding, for deals that would never come. I watched from the back, Claire's nails biting into her palms, my face blank, heart a steady thud in my chest. The judge sentenced them to 15 years each. No parole. The first breath I took outside the courthouse was the first one that didn't burn. Claire stood beside me, eyes red-rimmed but clear, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. For a long moment, we didn't speak, just stared out at the swarm of reporters, the flashing cameras, the chaos of a life we'd never wanted. Then she huffed out a laugh, weak and trembling, and glanced up at me, eyes glinting. Well, she rasped, voice raw. We did it. I let out a breath, shoulders sagging. Yeah, I muttered, mouth twisting. We did. The sun dipped low, casting the street in gold and shadow, and for the first time in months, the ache in my chest dulled. It wasn't peace, not really, but it was close enough. We stood there in silence, the city humming around us, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we might survive this after all.